Suggestions for the prevention of epidemics in general, especially in towns. Page number 253.
Suggestions for the prevention of epidemics in general, especially in towns. A well-ordered police should take care that rag gatherers are not allowed to live anywhere but in isolated houses near the paper mill, nor should they be permitted to have in any house in the town a place where they may deposit the rags by little and little, only to remove them when they have collected a large quantity. We should never be built close to towns and villages. Paper mills. Villages ki towns ke దగ్గరలో కాకుండా దూరంగా build చేయమన్నాడు. The regulations prevalent in electoral Saxony should be adopted with that the rag gatherer should keep in the open street with his barrow or cart by some signal summon around him those who have rags to sell, and not remain in the town with his collection of rags, but go into the country, and when he puts up a country inn, leave his cart in the open courtyard or before the door of the inn, a word leaving it in the open air. In a word, leaving it in the open air. He should be forbidden under the penalty of imprisonment to pick out from his heap the rags and sell to others for their use any articles of clothing that may be still fit for wear. They should also be forbidden to wear such articles themselves or put them on their children, which they will often do to the great detriment of their health, as I have often observed. బాగున్నాయి కదా బట్టలు తీసుకెళ్లి వాళ్ళ పిల్లలకు వేయడం వాళ్ళు వేసుకోవడం. I have seen a malignant epidemic of smallpox spread over the country from so doing. ఆ రకంగా చేయడం అన్నమాట. The paper mills should be so arranged that the supply of the crude rags should be kept in a well-ventilated buildings far away from the dwelling houses, and the reception of the rags from the gatherer and the weighing of them in order to determine the sum he is to receive should be carried on in a shed only covered at top. The dealers in old clothes should only be allowed to carry on their trade in open shops and should not be permitted to sell them in their houses under penalty of imprisonment. అలా అమ్మితే జైల్లో పెడతామని చెప్పమన్నాడు. అలా అయితేనే అవుతారు. All the linen and articles of clothing they have for sale in their shops should be previously washed, not excepting even the colored or woolen articles, and a police officer should be charged to examine if they are washed, who should overhaul the whole contents of the shop on undetermined days. Every article that he finds still dirty should become his property after having shown it to the inspector of police in the presence of the dealer. Should it be feared that such an article of clothing probably worn by a sick person might prove dangerous to the policeman, it should be considered that the poor broker, in order to avoid such a loss, will most certainly take care to have none but clean washed things in his shop, and thus the police agent will have little or nothing to confiscate. It should only be permitted to the burghers of the town to deal in old clothes. Jews engaging in this trade should be deprived of their letters of protection. Women found carrying it on should be put in house of correction. The civic crown merited by him who improves the prisons has been gained from us Germans by an Englishman, Howard Wagnitz, follows his steps. It is inconceivable how often the most destructive vapors are concentrated in these dens of misery, fraught with death to those that enter them. How often their visitors are prematurely sent to the grave by fatal typhus. Destructive epidemic diseases often have their origin in these death-laden walls. There are several kinds of prisons. I shall here allude only to those where the imprisonment is for life, and to those goals where prisoners guilty of capital crimes are kept until the termination of their trial, often for several years, the visitation or inspection of which is not unfrequently the cause of infectious diseases. Even when the prisoners themselves have not been ill of such fevers, their exhalations, their breath, and the miasm lurking about their dirty clothes have often occasioned malignant fatal fevers. Haysham, Pringle, Zimmerman, Sarkon, and Letsom adduce a number of cases of this kind. Now, as in the true spirit of laws that are free from all barbarity, even the punishment of death should have and can have no other aim than to render an incorrigible criminal innocuous and to remove him from human society. What else can both these kinds of imprisonment be than rendering the prisoner harmless in the former case of life, in the latter for a certain time pending the duration of the trial? None but Syracusan tyrants could dream of uniting a more inhuman object with such prisons. If then the goal even for capital offenders can and ought to be nothing but a means of depriving them of the opportunity of injuring society, in that case every torture that is unnecessarily inflicted on them when thus in custody is a crime on the part of the police. అంతే కదా వాళ్ళలో డిసైడ్ చేసి కరెక్ట్గా దాన్ని బట్టి వాళ్ళని ప్రిజన్లో పెట్టినప్పుడు రెండు రకాలుగా వాడు ఒకటేంటంటే వీడికి అవకాశం ఇవ్వకుండా వీడిని మిగతా వాళ్ళ నుంచి దూరం చేసేసి వీడు చేసేటువంటి క్రైమ్కి అవకాశం లేకుండా చేయడం ఒకటి. అలాగే వాడిని అలాగా సపరేట్ చేసేసి వాడిని దానికి కావాల్సిన పనిష్మెంట్ వరకు మాత్రం అది కరెక్ట్గా ప్రూవ్ అవ్వకుండా చేస్తే పోలీస్ సైడ్ అనేటువంటిది వీడు అఫెన్స్ అనేటువంటి చేశానంటే ఇప్పుడు జరుగుతున్నవి ఇవి. అప్పుడు కూడా I only allude here to the pain inflicted on them by unhealthy disease producing prison. అలాంటి prisons లో పెట్టడం అండి. In order to avoid this, prisons should never be raised less than 4 feet above the ground. Never be raised less than 4 feet above the ground. And the openings of the windows, while they are sufficiently narrow, should be always so long as to allow the free access of fresh air. పెద్ద కిటికీలు నేరో పెట్టమన్నాడు. ఎయిర్ బాగా వస్తుంది, ఎవడో ఏం చేయడానికి వీల్లేదు. ఎక్కడెక్కడి నుంచి అలా ఇచ్చాడో మరి, లేకపోతే వాళ్ళు ఎఫెక్ట్ అవుతారు, వాళ్ళ ద్వారా మిగతా వాళ్ళు కూడా ఇటువంటి వాటికి. Where two windows opposite each other cannot be obtained, which is the best plan. రెండు విండోస్ ఆపోజిట్ విండోస్ ఉంటే ఎయిర్ సర్క్యులేషన్ బాగుంటుంది కదా, అందుకే అలా పెడతాం. అది పాసిబుల్ కానప్పుడు కూడా ఏం చేయాలో చెబుతున్నాడు. There are to be at least 3 windows for each small cell. The floor should either be paved with slabs of stone or better with rounded stones, so that it may be deluged and scrubbed once a week with boiling water. ప్రతి విషయమును. The walls and roofs should be lined with wooden boards, like the peasants' houses, in order to allow of their being also washed with hot water, as is customary with the country people. The exhalation from these wretched creatures that constantly tends to decomposition, and the animal poison developed from their breath, whereby the air of their narrow cells is deteriorated, attaches itself in great quantity to the walls of the galls, and in course of time degenerates into pestilential miasm. By the process above described, it is removed and washed away by the boiling water. అవన్నీ చూసే పాపం ఏం రాశారు. ఫ్రీడమ్ ఇదివరకు ఎలా ఉండేది జైలు పనిష్మెంట్ అంటే. ఇప్పుడంటే రాజయోగం, జైల్లో ఉన్నవాడికి ఇంకా కొంతకాలం ఉంచితే బాగున్నట్టుగా విఐపీస్ అందరికి. మిగతా వాళ్ళకి కూడా పర్వాలే అప్పుడే కంపేర్ చేస్తారు. వాళ్ళు మనుషులే అనే భావంతో ట్రీట్ చేస్తున్నారు. అప్పట్లో అది ఉండేది కాదు. తప్పు చేశాడు కాబట్టి వాడికి అంతే శిక్షే అని అనుభవించాలి. By these means, these dismal habitations are at all events rendered dry residences, and the cachexia and tumors so frequently met with in such as have undergone a long imprisonment are in a great measure prevented. Life imprisonment ఉన్నవాళ్ళు, long period imprisonment లో ఉన్నవాళ్ళు, for them these diseases can be prevented by this process. If it were possible to construct an air hole for the purpose of carrying of the deteriorated vapors into the open air, gaols would thereby lose much of their dangerous aptitude to generate pests. The prisoner should have at least once a week a bundle of fresh straw for his bed. His bed cover, together with his clothes and linen, should be washed at least once a week in hot water. He himself should be forced, before putting on his clean clothes, to wash his body all over. His chamber utensil should be emptied daily and rinsed out with boiling water. He should be allowed to walk about in the open air at least once a week for at least an hour at a time. When he is removed from prison, his cell must be prepared for the reception of future prisoners by washing anew the floor, the walls and the roof with hot water, and by placing a small stove in it, a funnel of which goes out at the window. With this, the cell is to be heated very highly, so that the heat shall almost take away one's breath up to 120 ream. And then the stove should be again removed, supposing it is not allowed to have one in the cell. If not, an iron tube communicating with the open air should open in the floor of the cell, passing in winter through a heated stove, in order to conduct in a supply of fresh warm air. It is a great cruelty to shut up many prisoners together without allowing at least 500 cubic feet of space and air for each. ఒకరికి మధ్యన ఆ మాత్రం చోటు గాలి కోసం అవి ఉంచకుండా చేయడం అనేటువంటి చాలా హారబుల్ థింగ్ అంటున్నాడు. If this be not allowed, the better ones among the prisoners are exposed to much annoyance by the bad behavior of the worse ones, and it is incredible the rapidity with which the most destructive of all animal poisons, the virus of the most fatal pestilence, is generated. Police authorities, be humane. మనుషుల ప్రవర్తించబెట్టుబడి. I scarcely need to remark that the often long continued imprisonment of debtors who are frequently deserving of compassion ought to be made at least an innocuous for the health of the prisoners, of the turkeys, and of those who visit them, etc., as that of criminals. When foreign prisoners are field hospitals are introduced into a healthy country in time of war, whether temporarily or permanently, the authorities, if they have it in their power to act, should take care that an epidemic is not thereby brought into the country. Prisoners of war who are not unfrequently suffering from typhus and putrid fevers in their transit through a country are generally, when remaining for the night in towns, lodged in the town halls, apparently in order that they may be kept more securely. But how often has this practice given rise to the spread of the epidemic? It would be safer to quarter them in a large coach houses, stables, barns, etc., outside the town, to make them lie undressed on straw mattresses, keeping them warmly covered in winter, and in this manner retaining them until their march can be renewed. On the march they have plenty of air and exercise. In this way they get rest and warmth, and are incapacitated from making their escape. It would be safer to quarter them in large coach houses, stables, barns, etc., outside the town, to make them lie undressed on straw mattresses, keeping them warmly covered in winter. If the season of the year admit of it, they must be compelled to wash each other's clothes and linen with hot water, and to dry them in the open air. The most destructive pestilences are most easily engendered by military hospitals. It would be the most disgraceful barbarity even in an enemy to erect them in the middle of the town. But if nevertheless this is done, there remain for the poor townsman, if they bring pestilence along with them, as they usually do, very few means of preserving the life and health of himself and family, and these he should carefully attend to. If he will not or cannot leave the town, he must at all events avoid all intercourse and communication with the sick, with infected houses, and even with those who frequent such houses. If they bring him anything, he should take it from them at his house door or in the open court. Should it be articles of clothing or linen, he should not make use of them before he has plunged them into hot water mingled with vinegar in the open court, or thoroughly fumigated them with sulfur. Should it be articles of food, let him not partake of them before preparing them on the fire or otherwise heating them. A person who is exposed to the danger of infection should not allow his courage to sink should not leave off any of his accustomed comforts, rest, exercise, food or drink, but he should also carefully avoid all excess in any of these things, as also in passions, venereal excitement, etc. The other prophylactic measures that should be adopted will be found in the first part of the Friend of Health. A slight increase of stimulants such as wine, tobacco and snuff is said to be a powerful prophylactic against infectious disorders. Infectious diseases have even been communicated by money and letters. The former may be washed in boiling water. the latter fumigated with sulfur. Although the animal poisons called infectious miasmata are not infectious at the distance of several paces in still open air, so that we may, with exercise of great care, preserve our house free from infection in the midst of houses where the melody is raising, we should remember that a draught of air can carry the miasms arising from a sick person to a distance of many paces and then occasion infection. On that account, we should avoid traversing narrow lanes where we should have to pass close by a sick person, and for a similar reason, we should shun narrow passages through houses. ఇళ్ళ మధ్యలో ఉన్నటువంటి narrow passages నుంచి కూడా వెళ్ళొద్దంటున్నాడు. Above all, we should refrain from looking into an open window and conversing with the people in whose house or room cases of infectious diseases may exist. కిటికీల నుంచి కూడా చాలా వస్తుందిగా మీకు అసలు ఎయిర్ సర్క్యులేషన్ ఉండదు కదా. అందుకే అపార్ట్మెంట్స్లో డిస్టెన్స్ మధ్యలో కంపల్సరీ చేశారు కాబట్టి అపార్ట్మెంట్స్లో ఏం ప్రాబ్లం లేకుండా ఉంటుంది. దగ్గర బాంబే అక్కడ చూస్తే ఓల్డ్ అపార్ట్మెంట్స్ ఉంటాయి, చాలా నేరో. హైదరాబాద్లో కొన్ని ఏరియాస్ ఓల్డ్ ఏరియాస్లో కట్టిన అపార్ట్మెంట్స్, బాంబేలో కొన్ని ఓల్డ్ ఏరియాస్లో కట్టిన అపార్ట్మెంట్స్ చూస్తే పక్కపక్కనే అసలు ఒక అపార్ట్మెంట్కి ఇంకో అపార్ట్మెంట్కి మధ్య చోటు ఉండదు. అసలు ఒక కంప్లీట్ అపార్ట్మెంట్, ఒక ఫుల్ అపార్ట్మెంట్కి ఇంకో అపార్ట్మెంట్కి మధ్యన ఎక్కువ స్పేస్ ఉండదు కొన్ని ఏరియాస్లో చూస్తే. బాంబేలో చూసాను, హైదరాబాద్లో చూసాను.
Acquaintances kiss each other or shake hands. This ceremony should be omitted when the danger is so imminent as also drinking out of another's glass. We should particularly avoid making use of a stranger's water closet or allowing a stranger to use ours. At such times, we should never bring second-hand furniture into our premises. Second-hand furniture. I have seen putrid fevers occur periodically for many years in the country merely by old furniture which had belonged to persons who have died of such affections coming into other families by purchase. ఎన్ని అబ్జర్వ్ చేశారా ఆయన. ఇవన్నీ మందులు ఇవ్వడమే కాకుండా ఇవన్నీ హోమియోపతి కనుక్కోవడమే ఒక పెద్ద ఇది. దాంట్లో ఇన్ని డైమెన్షన్స్ మళ్ళీ ఇవన్నీ. Domestic animals that are given to rove such as dogs and cats, often carry about with them in their hairs the virus of infectious diseases. For security's sake, it is advisable to get rid of them at such times and not to allow strange dogs or cats to approach us. The drying up of marshes and old ditches close to human dwellings has frequently been the occasion of the most murderous pestilences. I saw the 40th part of the inhabitants of a large town die of typhus in consequence of the incautious draining of the town fosse. Whenever the slime of such a town fosse, which may have been accumulating for many, perhaps hundreds of years, is deprived of the fresh water covering it, the half-putrid animal matters contained in it immediately pass into the large stage of decomposition. This last stage of decomposition of animal substances is infinitely more poisonous than all the previous ones, as we may see in the rapid fatality of the exhalations from cesspools which have not been cleared out for 30 years or more. Of this more hereafter. In the fosse surrounding the town is to be cleared out of dried up, as is highly desirable for the health of the inhabitants of all towns. This work should only be undertaken in the depth of winter. Winter madhyalo cheyamannadu. Ilantivani. The water should be carried off in the form of ice layers, and the ice that forms again in a few nights should next be taken away, and so on till no more water remains. వాటర్ క్యారీ చేయడం కాకుండా గడ్డగట్టేస్తుంది వాళ్ళ కంట్రీస్లో వింటర్లో ఆ గడ్డగట్టిన ఐస్ అంతా తీసుకెళ్ళిపోయి మొత్తం అక్కడ కింద ఇంకేం లేకుండా అది పూర్తయ్యే వరకు ఐస్ తీసుకెళ్ళిపోమన్నాడు, ఎక్కడ పడేయమన్నాడు బొట్టుపోయి. But as the removal of mud from town ditches is much preferable to letting it gradually dry up, seeing that throughout the whole time required for the latter, noxious vapors are constantly exhaling, there is no better time for removing it than in severe cold. The mud, which is always in a state of putrefaction, is always warm and never freezes so much as to prevent its being easily dug out in winter. We can also more readily dispense with draught cattle on account of the excellent condition of the roads in severe frosty weather. After great inundations on the flat land, the spontaneous drying up of which cannot be expected to take place in a short time, it is requisite that all should lend a hand to cut ditches through and round about the inundated country. But if it is impossible to drain off the water into the river on account of its low level, a number of small windmills must be erected in order to pump off the water as quickly as possible and dry the land. For if this be not done, the water readily takes on the putrefactive process, giving rise from spring to autumn to dysenteries and putrid fevers. The low-lying houses that have been inundated by the water are a fertile source of epidemic diseases. The police authorities must see that every householder digs a deep ditch round his premises, and especially round his dwelling house, that he has all the windows and doors open for the greater part of the day, that he occasionally lights fires even in summer, and that in winter at all events before he rises in the morning, all the doors and windows are left open for an hour at a time. fresh air. There are places that are destitute of the often unacknowledged benefit of a sufficient supply of fresh flowing water, in place of which the inhabitants are obliged to make use of spring or rainwater brought from a distance, or to put up the rainwater only. In all such cases, they collect their supply of water for a long time in large reservoirs, in which it becomes stale in a few days and furnishes a very unwholesome drink, the source of many diseases. Soon it again becomes clear and inodorous, but in a short time the putrefaction recommences, and so it goes on until the water is all consumed. The greater part of it is in a very bad taste. I should not here attempt to determine whether these disadvantages might have been obviated by the construction of artificial aqueducts on no very expensive scale or of very deep wells, but I am convinced that in flat localities on firm soil, it is possible to resort to one or other of these plants, whatever may be alleged against it by the paltry parsimony of many corporations who look unmoved whilst many such communities gradually die out. పెద్ద ఎక్స్పెన్సివ్ ఏం చేయక్కలే, ఇలాంటి కొన్ని టేకప్ చేస్తే చాలు. ఇన్ ది absence of such a radical cure, I would advise every householder to keep his supply of water in casks, in which for every 400 pounds of water 1 pound of powdered wood charcoal should be thrown. Which, according to the discovery of Lowish, possesses the power of preservating water from putrefaction and of making stale water sweet. చార్కోల్ పౌడర్ ఏమన్నాడు వేస్తే వాటర్ ప్యూరిఫై అవుతుందా, అది కిందకి వెళ్ళిపోతుంది, పైన వాటర్ ఫస్ట్ క్లాస్గా ఉంటుంది, తాగడానికి పాడైపోకుండా శుభ్రంగా ఉంటుందన్నాడు. మనకి దీని బదులే పట్టిక వాడతాం, పట్టిక వాడితే అవన్నీ శుభ్రంగా ఉంటాయి, పట్టిక పౌడరు. The clear fluid may be drawn off when required through a tap provided with a tight linen bag. A similar precaution against the production of disease is adopted in large ships that go to sea, which are often reduced to great straits on account of a deficiency supply of fresh water. But many causes conspire in ships to produce destructive diseases. Major Nante observed drinking the war betwixt England and North America a pestilential goal fever breakout on board the feet lying off the Havana of such severity. The numbers of men who seemed to be in perfect health died after an illness of not more than from 3 to 4 hours. Among these are the mode of feeding the crew so much in vogue, with often half-decayed, dried and salted meat, with unwholesome fatty substances of various kinds, the want of fresh air when during continued storms they have to pass many days together below the deck with the portholes closed, when the exhalations from their bodies increase to a pestilential fever. The exhaustion of the sailors when kept at work too long, during which their wet clothes check the perspiration. These causes engender and keep up scurvy, dysentery and other maladies. The risk of such disorders may be avoided by the following measures. Supplying vegetable food. And in the absence of green herbs, dried legumes that so easily ferment. Sauerkraut. Sauerkraut అంటే kraut.
Croutons are small pieces of toasted or fried bread that are added to soup just before you eat it. Croutons.
It is made by fermenting.
CROUT.
Chopping cabbage and cabbage chopping.
It is fried bread with that.
It is made by fermenting. Finally chopping cabbage.
Sometimes brown sugar in place of oil. Brandy for strengthening. Like cotton. Ayo bread, fried bread. First use 1806 లో యూజ్ చేశారు. ఫస్ట్ 1806 లో యూజ్ చేశారు అలాగా. Brandy for strengthening. Meat soups boiled down and dried in place of kept meat. Malt liquor to drink in addition to water. The division of labor into 8 hours work. Care that the crew have always dry clothes to put on, and that their habits are cleanly. Frequent pumping out of the necessary and the purification of air between decks by means of large braziers of burning charcoal according to Cook's method. The frequent washing with seawater of the various utensils, the floor, the walls of the decks must not be neglected. If powdered charcoal be mingled with the seawater used in scrubbing, the stench of the walls will be effectually got rid of. In addition to all this, care should be taken not to take on board sick persons or such as have scarcely recovered from illness, and all the utensils and furniture should be frequently exposed to the air on deck when the weather is good. By the employment of Sutton's method of conducting leaden pipes into all parts of the ship, which all terminate in the kitchen fireplace, the deteriorated air will most certainly be drawn off by the fire. But Cook's braziers do much more, for they heat the walls and thus destroy the contagious matter much more effectually. Hale's ventilators, a kind of wooden bellows, are little used in ships. Would not the so-called garden cress, Epidemics sativum.
Okay.
It should be definitely a plant. అంతే కదా.
అంతా మాలిక్యులర్ బయాలజీ ఈ లెవెల్ గడిపాం, ఇవన్నీ వదిలేసాం. మాలిక్యులర్ బయాలజీ ఎంతవరకు సిస్టమ్ న్యూటన్ అదే కదా ఎడ్యుకేషన్ సిస్టమ్ లైక్ దట్.
be a valuable vegetable or at all events be useful on board ship as a medicine in order to diminish the noxious matters in the first passages. Garden cress అన్నాడు, లెపిడియం సటైవం చూడండి సార్. గార్డెన్ క్రస్ అదే గార్డెన్ క్రస్ లెపిడియం సటైవం రెండో ఒకటే.
Referred to as garden cress to distinguish it from similar plants, also referred to as cress, is a rather fast-growing edible plant, genetically related to watercress and mustard, sharing their peppery, tangy flavor and aroma. An annual plant can reach a height of 60.
అంటే మస్ట్ దీనిలాగా ఆవాల facility with which its seed grows is well known.
E.V.M. equipment.
We only need to strew it upon a piece of old wet sailcloth and cover it with unraveled pieces of old moistened tow. In towns where no rapid stream of water can be conducted through, even the small streets wherein the animal excrements, the washing water, the urine and other impurities of men and animals can be carried off without doing any harm, covered cesspools cannot be dispensed with. These cesspools are always a bad thing for the health of man from their aptitude to engender or at least to promote pestilence. In order to render them as innocuous as possible, they should be built up in with masonry, not only on the roof and the walls, but they should also be paved on the floor with stones cemented together, in order that the putrefying impurities may not sink into the ground, but be capable of being taken clean away. కాలంలో అడుగులు కూడా సిమెంట్ చేసేయమంటున్నాడు, అప్పుడే చెప్పాడు. సైడ్స్నే కాదు. They must be frequently cleansed out and the water removed quickly. The time selected for cleansing them should be during the prevalence of a strong wind, more especially one from the north, northeast, east or southeast, and those days should be avoided when a long period of warm rain, calm and foggy weather with a low state of barometer prevails. వర్షాలు పడుతూ వాతావరణం డల్గా అంటే చేయొద్దండి, మంచు పడుతూ ఉంటాయి. అంటే అదంతా ఇక్కడ పట్టేసి ఇక్కడే ఉంటుంది, జనాల్లో అవే పీలుస్తూ ఉంటారు. Though we are not able to adduce any instances in which the exhalations from old privies have spread a pestilence of any duration, yet no good police which attends to the health of the community should permit them, and moreover cases have occurred where workmen suffocated in such places have spread such a virulent exhalation from their clothes that many of those approaching them have been cut off by typhus fever. In order to avoid the pestilential poison proceeding from animal substances in the last stage of putrefaction, the most destructive of all poisons, the removal of such murderous pits should be advised, and no sensible persons will object to this. ఆ పిట్స్ తీసేమన్నాడు అసలు అలాంటి. And no sensible persons will object to this. Are already in existence and require to be
Cleared out. Required to be cleared out. We must not go to work incautiously. The simplest method of freeing such pits
from their poisonous exhalations is always the lowering into them of small loose bundles of ignited straw attached to a wire. Since there is rarely in them an inflammable gas that might endanger the house by its ignition. These bundles are to be let down to the depth at which they will almost to be extinguished by the vapor, and then they would be allowed to burn out. This process is to be repeated with larger and larger ignited bundles until the stratum of gas is removed to the very floor of the pit, and atmospheric air occupies the place of fire extinguishing gas. But our precautionary measures should not cease here, for it is not only want of atmospheric air that kills the workmen in such situations, but still more the vapor that rises, though not to any great height in consequence of its weight, from stirring up the human excrement that has entered on the last stage of putrefaction. In order to render this as harmless as possible, a quantity of dry faggots ignited should be thrown into the pit, sufficient to cover all the bottom of it, and there they should be left till they are totally consumed. The heat that generated will, after the lapse of an hour, have rendered the odor innocuous to at least a foot in depth. This quantity should then be removed by the workmen. Faggots are then to be burnt as before on what is beneath, whereupon the next layer is removed, and so on until it is all cleared away. Should it really prove true that the most of our police authorities have abolished burials in churches, we should not be thereby set quite at our ease. The old graves still exist in our churches, in which the last and most poisonous stage of decomposition of the dead bodies has not ceased to emit its destructive emanations. It should be borne in mind that the most fatal gas generated by the last stage of putrefaction does not readily rise, but is heavy and not unfrequently repose in a low stratum above the corrupting matter until it is stirred up and is thus rendered dangerous to life. Hence, alterations and building operations in the floors of such churches are fought with manifest danger to the life of the workmen and the congregations in the churches, whence diseases may spread over a considerable portion of the population. In June 1773, a grave was opened in the church of Salio in Burgundy, and church service performed soon afterwards, in consequence of which 40 children and 200 grown-up people, together with the clergyman and sexton, were assailed by the exhalation that arose and carried off by a malignant disorder. Moreover, it has not yet been perfectly ascertained how many years the contagious principle may remain attached in undiminished virulence to the buried corpses of those who have died of malignant diseases. In many countries, the lying in state of all bodies is very properly forbidden. అందుకే వీటన్నిటినీ ఆలోచించి మన దాంట్లో బాడీస్ని దహనం చేయడం అనేటువంటిది బెస్ట్ మెథడ్. అసలు ఇవేమి ఉండవు కదా. In many countries, the lying in state of all bodies is very properly forbidden. But in others, where not so much enlightenment prevails, infectious diseases are often propagated by the exposure of such poisonous bodies, of which I could adduce many examples from Saxony, Saxony. In 1780, a girl brought a putrid fever with her, Quensidat from Asterleben. All her numerous brothers and sisters and her parents took ill of it, one after the other. But they all gradually recovered except the grown-up daughter who died of bed sores. I took the greatest pains to prevent the disease being propagated to others from this house. I succeeded in this for 5 months until this girl had to be buried. The young men of the village bore the body in a coffin nailed up according to my directions to the grave. Here, from their attachment to the deceased, they disobeyed the strict orders given by my friend, the clergyman. They forced open the lid of the coffin in order to see the corpse once more before it was let down into the grave. Others, moved by curiosity, approached. The third and fourth day thereafter, all those that had been guilty of this excess lay mortally sick of this fever, as also all those who had come near the grave, some of them from neighboring villages, to the number of 18, of whom only a few escaped death.
Mortally sick.
The epidemic of putrid fever spread around at the same time. Is it not desirable that those important personages in the state called inspectors of the dead and corpse washers, whose business it originally was to form a silent judgment respecting the kind of death that had occurred and to verify the disease, should receive from the judicial medical officer accurate instructions on this by no means easy point before undertaking such an exceedingly important duty. How many lives of those apparently dead might they not be instrumental in restoring? How many cases of murder might they not detect? And what interests us peculiarly in this place, how often might they not discover that so who have died without having been seen by any physician might have labored under contagious diseases. We should not be too rash with the bodies brought to the dissecting rooms, not receive such as we may suspect to have died of contagious diseases, nor keep the subjects until they are in the last stage of putrefaction, nor for the sake of bravado have too much to do with macerated parts in a state of extreme decomposition, and often melting away under our touch, which can no longer teach us anything. So those bodies are not useful for dissection. Examples are not wanting for the students who were merely looking on being rendered dangerously ill thereby. So when they try to dissect those bodies, definitely they will be affected, the students. But chiefly are the contagious pestilences in towns harbored, renewed, promoted and rendered more contagious and more murderous in the small, low, old houses situated close to the town walls, huddled together in narrow, damp lanes, or otherwise deprived of the access of fresh air, where poverty dwells, the mother of dirt, hunger and despondency. So in those areas, definitely these will increase these types of diseases. In order to save firing and the expensive rent, several miserable families are often packed close together, often all in one room, and they avoid opening a window or door to admit fresh air.
because the cold would enter along with it. He alone whose business takes him into these abodes of misery can know how the animal matters of the exhalations and of the breath are there concentrated, stagnant and putrefying, how the lungs of one are struggling to snatch from those of another the small quantity of vital air in the place in order to render it back laden with the effect matters of the blood, how the dim melancholy light from their small darkened windows is conjoined with the relaxing humidity and the mouldy strength of the old rags and decayed straw, and how grief, envy, quarrelsomeness and other passions strive to rob the inmates completely of their little bit of health. అందరూ కలిసి చిన్న రూమ్లోనో చిన్న ఇంట్లోనో ఎక్కడ ఏమీ గాలి కానీ ఫ్రెష్ ఎయిర్ కానీ సన్లైట్ కానీ ఏవి రాని రూమ్లో ఇంట్లోనో ఉన్నప్పుడు వాట్ హ్యాపెన్స్? A group of people are staying. They will not allow the other persons to open the windows or the doors with a fear that they may be affected with cold. What happens? The breath, all the breath which they have exhalated will be circulating in the room. So this will lead to many hazards. In such places it is where infectious pestilences not only smolder on easily and almost constantly when a spark falls upon them, but where they take their rise, burst forth and even become fatal to the wealthy citizens. It is the province of the authorities and the fathers of the country to change their birthplaces to pestilence into healthy, happy human dwellings. So the government and the ruling people, they have to remove them to healthy places. Otherwise, they not only they will be affected, but they will have the birthplace of many infectious and horrible diseases, which will spread into the town. Nothing is left for me but to turn my face away from them and to keep my compassion to myself. If, however, the inmates of them be not without employment, their systems accustomed to meager fare and hard work resist infections tolerably well. But when they are out of work, when dearness to the first necessaries of life and famine prevail among them, then from these dirty sources of misery and woe, diseases of malignant character and pestilences perpetually issue. It is only since the fearful years 1771, 72 and 73 that some rulers have learned from the dangers to which they themselves were exposed to provide for the safety and their safety of their many thousand subjects by establishing corn granaries and flour magazines against seasons of scarcity. When they were affected, then they could understand how to do. Then they have started and they could learn. I must make the general observation belonging to this place that most of our towns are not adapted, not calculated to promote health. High town walls and ramparts are now generally acknowledged to be useless for towns that are not fortified. That they are injurious by preventing the access of fresh air will also be readily conceded. But that the masses of houses of most towns and too closely huddled together is not yet generally seen, and when it is attempted, but without success, to be excused by the greater facilities offered for business and trade by having everything within a small circle. In towns about to be built, it should not be allowed to build houses higher than 2 stories. అప్పుడే చెప్పాడు, అంతలా చెప్పాడు. Houses higher than 2 stories. Every street should be at least 20 places in width. 20 paces in width and built quite straight in order that the air may permeate it unimpeded and behind every house, the corner houses perhaps excepted. There should be a courtyard and a garden as broad and twice as long as the house. అంతకన్నా పెద్దది ఉండాలి courtyard. In this way, the air may be readily renovated behind the houses in the considerable spaces formed by the adjoining gardens and in front in the broad straight streets. This arrangement would be so effectual for suppressing infectious diseases and for preserving the general health that if it were adopted, most of the precautionary measures against pestilence I have inculcated above would be rendered to a great degree superfluous. What advantages in this respect do not Newed, Desson and possess? The deteriorated air in closely built towns with high houses is especially injurious to children and gives rise to those deformities to be beautiful of the beautiful human figure dominated rickets, which consists of a softening of the bones combined with laxness of the muscles, inactivity of the lymphatic system and a high degree of irritability. దానివల్ల ఎంత ఏమేమి వస్తాయో కూడా అంతలా ఇచ్చాడు అసలు. The non-medical observer does not readily notice the large number of these pitiable little monstrosities in closely built towns, partly because a great many of them sink into the grave in the first years of their life, partly because the cripples who escape conceal themselves for shame and from the public gaze. The handsome, roomy, high and airy butchers' shops we meet in the town, example Dresden, are not so good as the open butchers' stalls standing in market placed and only covered by a roof. A putrid stench is always concentrated in the shops built for the sale of meat. ప్రతి ఆస్పెక్ట్ ఆయన టచ్ చేశారు.